Hi, welcome to Tradition Today. I'm your host, Father David Smith. With today's program, we continue a series on generosity and the mission of the church. In this series, I examine the reason why we should support the church, why we should work for the ongoing life of the church based on the virtue of generosity, on trust in God, and also on the understanding of the church's mission. So enjoy the third part of this five-part series entitled Trust in God. Most of us grew up with cars that had a spare tire in the trunk, not the little temporary tires they provide us with nowadays, but a full-sized tire with a jack and with a lug nut wrench, one that was shaped like a plus and not these little Barbie's hockey stick things that they give you nowadays. Everything you needed to take care of yourself if you had a flat. When I was young, I never had AAA. I do now. I never had AAA because if I had a flat tire, I would get out and fix it. If there was something wrong with my car, I would either figure it out or I would start walking. Well, one time, my wife and I were riding in the car. We had a flat when I was in grad school, and I said to my wife, no problem. I finally get to use the spare tire. We had owned the car for about a year, and I knew it was back there. I'd seen it, but I had never used it. Well, I opened up the trunk, and I found out that whoever owned the car before me had also had a flat. And he put the damaged tire into the trunk and never replaced it and never did anything with it. It looked fine, of course, because a flat tire only looks flat when it's actually on the car. So the thing looked fine, but when I reached down and pulled it out of the trunk, I felt the nail. The nail was still in the tire. I felt the nail that was in the tire, and I took a look at it, and I knew that, of course, it was useless. As we went about the task of taking care of our truck that night, taking care of the car that night, I was thinking about all the time that I was driving around with the confidence of a man who had a spare tire that was going to help him out when he needed it most. I had a foolproof backup plan, right? But really I didn't. That wasn't the last time I found myself trusting in something that was not trustworthy. One day when I was running a nursing home, the electricity went off in the neighborhood where the nursing home was located. All nursing homes are required to have backup generators, and our backup generator worked just fine. The electricity went off and the generator went on and everything was fine. At least we thought it was fine. We had a new resident who had a broken back, and she had come in with something that it's used a lot nowadays, but at the time it was brand new. It was a mattress, a special inflatable mattress that had all of these cells in it, these, almost like balloons, and they would, according to a computer that was connected to it, they would deflate and inflate and so on, and it would keep her comfortable. It would keep her moving around a little bit so that the staff didn't have to move her around, and she would be able to lay in one position but still be a little bit more comfortable. Well, we didn't know that this would happen, but when the electricity went off, the mattress deflated rather quickly, and so bonk, down she went onto the bed, and when the electricity came back on, the mattress did not re-inflate. You had to manually re-inflate the mattress. I'm sure they fixed that by now because it was something else. We knew that there was something wrong when we heard her screaming. And we went into the room, and as quickly as we could, we reinflated the mattress. She was really very angry, and then later on her family was very angry. And then, as I remember, later on the Department of Health was very angry, and all of those angry people got to come to my office because that's where all the angry people went. And it was part of my job to sit and listen to them yelling. So anyway, what do you do when your backup plan fails? What do you do when something you've put your trust in doesn't work and leaves you out in the cold? I'm going to read from a passage from St. Luke's Gospel. This is from St. Luke chapter 12, verses 16 through 21, a short passage. Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So it is. So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." The rich man in this parable today trusted in his abundant riches and then found himself without hope. He thought he had a foolproof backup plan. He did not. The parable itself is rather simple. It's a person who was very rich, thought that he didn't need to worry anymore, but then found himself without hope. He was wrong, and that's essentially the whole thing. What do we take away from this parable? I can say unequivocally that the parable is not telling us not to save up things. In our culture, in our present economic situation, we learn to save. We have to learn to save from an early age. We have to save or we wouldn't be able to maybe go to college or be able to buy a house or be able to retire or whatever the situation is. So yes, we need to save. The Scripture's not telling us not to save. But what are the lessons from this parable, from this rich man and his barns? Well, first, an important part of this story is that the man believes himself to have no more worries. That's the meaning of, I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Take your rest, your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. So here's the first lesson, that the world is full of worries. It's never not going to be. When we turn our back on the pain and sorrow of this world, when we think ourselves to be above the suffering, which is an essential element of this fallen world, we deny the structure of reality. That is, that we are here living in the kingdom of the devil, and we live here for a purpose. We are here for a purpose. Many years ago, I was the director of a summer camp. I opened a summer camp north of Montreal for the Antiochian Orthodox Church. And this was our first year, just getting started and so on. And so I was hiring the staff, and I hired a young woman who was going to a very prestigious university, and she was there on a full athletic scholarship. The sport, by the way, was cross country. I didn't know they gave you full academic scholarships for cross country, but apparently they do. So I hired her. She seemed like she would be a good counselor. Well, when we first got started, after staff training for about a week, the campers arrived. And on the day the campers arrived, this particular counselor was nowhere to be found. didn't know where she was. And so her assistant counselor, who was a high school student, who was extremely capable, extremely responsible, really smart kid, she kind of handled everything. And what with everything going on, I kind of forgot about the fact that this counselor had been absent when the campers arrived. Well, I remembered when, after a few days, the assistant counselor came to me and said that she would like to be reassigned to another group. She said the counselor goes away for long periods of time to go running. She would run long distances, 10, 20 miles, and then when she would come back, she would want to spend some time recovering. So she really wasn't doing what she was supposed to do. So I called her, called her in. I didn't really have an office, but I told her I wanted to speak with her, and I told her, you're here to take care of this group of campers. And your assistant counselor is not the one who should be running the group and watching everything for you. And she was really almost incredulous. She couldn't really understand because all of her life she had been going to summer camp. Summer camp was fun. Summer camp was doing what you enjoyed doing and relaxing and things like this. And the things that I was saying to her certainly didn't sound like fun. And I'm not sure if she really didn't understand, but from what she was saying to me, it sounded like she didn't understand her responsibility, her purpose for being there. And so ultimately, at the end of that conversation, that one conversation, I had to tell her to gather her stuff together and go home. I had to split up her group among other groups, and her assistant went to a different group. Camp is fun when you're a camper, but as anybody can tell you who's been a camp counselor, being a camp counselor is nothing like being a camper at all. This man in this parable that we just read thought that having lots of assets would free him from all worries. All work, not all work, no work, all fun, and that this led to the loss of his soul. It's not the fact that he saved that gave him trouble, but the fact that he turned his back on reality. We all occasionally long to be free from worry, but to think of this as a permanent condition is a way of denying our reason to be here in this dark and broken world. We are the light, and the light constantly fights against the darkness. Christianity is the ark of salvation, but it is not a cruise ship, brothers and sisters. It is a battleship. The counselor in my illustration thought of camp as a time for no responsibility. And when she was called on to show responsibility, she denied. She denied the reality of the fact of her new position. Another lesson from this. Abundance is not in itself evil, but our attitude toward it can damage our souls. Notice that this man, when he speaks to himself, speaks to his soul. That is, he told his soul to stop looking to God for salvation, for protection, and instead, look to his barns. His attitude toward abundance had become a spiritual matter, just as our attitude toward abundance is a spiritual matter. Your attitude toward money and my attitude toward money is a spiritual matter. It doesn't seem that way because it has math in it. $1, $2, right? It has math in it, and math doesn't seem very spiritual. The man could, in the parable, keep track on a ledger about how much that he was keeping, how much he had on hand, how much cash he had on hand, how he was investing in his business, and so on and so forth. But the numbers in that ledger influenced his soul and were influenced by his soul. In the end, it is our souls that are required. What does the gospel say? Fool, this night your soul is required of you. At the moment we pass from this world, it doesn't matter what degrees we have, what job we have, how much money we've saved, how successful our family is. It's the soul that is required. Our time in this world is given to us so that we can make sure our soul is ready. But how do we do that? Well, first, we nourish our souls by trusting in God. That's the central message of this parable. Trust in God and Him alone. The Proverbs, the book of the Bible that tells us how to lead a good and a wise life, says this in chapter 3, simply, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Secondly, humility nourishes our souls. The second lesson from this parable is that this man's abundance destroyed his humility. The image I want you to remember is from another parable, the parable of the prodigal son. Remember how the father runs toward the son in order to embrace him before he actually arrives at the house, when he's still off down the road. The running itself is important. The man, any man like the father in that parable, would wear robes normally. Robes are not good for running. You don't see runners wearing robes in order to get a little bit faster time. Robes are terrible for running. As a matter of fact, when you want to run, you need to hike up your robes, exposing at least your legs. This is the picture of humility that I want you to remember. Not only that the Son, who represents us, goes to the Father in humility and defeat, but that the Father reciprocates in humility as well. God on the cross gives us a picture of His condescension, gives us a picture of how He opened a way for us to return to Him. Returning to the Father nourishes our souls, brothers and sisters, and He runs to us. No matter what the cost, He runs to us to meet us and to forgive us. And finally, generosity feeds our souls. Abundance can feed generosity, as I said in the first two parts of this series, but we have to do it deliberately. St. Paul says in his second letter to the Corinthians in chapter 9, each one must do as he has made up in his mind, not reluctantly or under compulsion, because God loves a cheerful giver. What does he say? To make up in our mind. We must make up our minds to be generous. We must decide to be generous, not only when we're asked to be, but to embrace a life, an attitude of generosity. The man in today's parable had a foolproof plan into which he put all of his trust, his very own spare tire, his very own automatic backup generator. But when he needed it to work, it didn't work, and he was lost. He is a negative example for us, but hearing the gift of this warning from St. Luke's Gospel today gives us a heads up and bids us do what? Put trust in God alone. To continue the quotation from St. Paul, God is able to provide you with every blessing in abundance, so that you may always have enough of everything and may provide in abundance for every good work. As it is written, He scatters abroad, He gives to the poor, His righteousness endures forever. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your resources and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every good way for great generosity, through us will produce thanksgiving to God.